right, greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to us talking about Resident Evil Village Gold Edition. What's different this time around is we actually had time to play the game, play through either some of the story, or some people played Mercenaries or the third-person mode. So we're here to give our final opinion as to what we think about the game so far and everything we've seen within the contents of the plot. I have to warn people and reiterate, if you're watching this podcast, there's going to be spoilers. It's a spoiler cast, so if you haven't played the DLC and the story, I will suggest not watching this. You have been warned, so just letting you know. I am your host, Renegade Operative, and I would like to introduce Black Shadow.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Hope you're all keeping well. You have well and truly been warned. Before we talk about a kind of curious DLC and one that had been long awaited, some 18 months after the original game's release, which is quite a long time for a DLC, but it was a curious time.
Next up, we have Zamzar.
Hey, how's it going? Happy to be here.
Good to have you. Good to have you. Next up, we have Austin.
Hello, I'm AK Austin, and I'm ready to get this underway.
Next up, we have Hey Devil.
How's it going, guys? Thanks for having me. Super excited to discuss more about RE Village and this DLC.
And last but not least, we have Mr. Deadman Gaming. Introduce yourself, good sir.
Hello, everybody. It's Deadman Gaming. I pretty much just like things and am excited to talk about Resident Evil 8.
All right, so without further delay, let's get right into the first question. We're going to be talking about like just the general gameplay of Shadows of Rose once we started the campaign and how we feel about that. And I want to start with Austin. Austin, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. Just getting my notes sorted here, I guess.
Yep, it's your question number one.
Alrighty, how do you mostly feel about the Shadows of Rose DLC? Not that you finally played it from start to finish. We're talking gameplay only here. How do I feel about the DLC? I actually quite enjoyed it. I found it to be pretty fun, albeit a little slow paced, but I think that's what they were trying to go for. They were trying to go for more of a story narrative gameplay pace, which I had no issue about. I did feel, though, that in certain combat situations, scenarios, I was like, I need to run, and I was like, I have to run really early just to get away from some of the creatures that you have to face in the game. But no, I love the gameplay elements. I love having to use mechanics to deal with certain enemy situations, and the mechanic itself was like its own resource management, which I thought was really cool. Overall, I think the gameplay was at least on the lowest level was fine. Overall, I think it was good in my opinion. I quite enjoyed it, especially the last boss. I actually really enjoyed the last boss, and I know quite a few people didn't. I was like, okay then. But yeah, that's all I have to really say. Gameplay was fine. It was fun, and I quite enjoyed it.
Next up, we have Shadow.
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the start, it had been some 18 months between the original game being released and Shadows of Rose DLC coming out, which is a long time for like a first piece of sort of standalone DLC to come out. Well, after a point when, if it'd been like 6 months, fine, but for well over a year, I did find myself having to like quickly remember what on earth happened in the original game in the first place, which, for whatever reason, it was that long, so be it. If it had anything to do with the leaks, if it had anything to do with problems, whatever else, so be it. I think my own opinion of the Shadows of Rose is that I as I've mentioned in my recordings, I enjoyed it. I thought it was probably a fairly fitting end to the Winter Saga. And I only came for the story. I don't think this game was ever going to set the world alight on gameplay. That wasn't its point. I think it was more about kind of bringing a summary end to the Winter storyline, and giving it that big dramatic finale. Where Rose finally gets to have her moment with her father before they inevitably have to split ways for good. Because unfortunately, nothing can be happy forever. At least until Resident Evil 9. We'll see about that. But in any event, yeah, I thought it was fine. I think the game played okay. It was a bit wacky. I think the story. I actually thought the story was kind of inventive. I thought it was fairly kind of cute. Obviously, it's always tricky when you're having to reuse a lot of the old assets and then trying to justify a reason to do that, which I think they did well enough with the plot line. And even the final boss fight, like I actually think it was slightly more interesting than, say, the final fight in Village, which was just a big giant sponge. At least this was a big giant sponge that had some kind of actually fairly destructive attacks. So I was like, fine enough. But I heard some people that I was speaking to kind of say, it was kind of, it was so gameplay. It's like, what were you expecting, really? So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for what it was. I came for the story, and I thought that delivered. And I think that was the main part for the DLC. But obviously, gameplay wise, it was what it was. But I think I don't think that was a problem.
Okay, I'll go next. So, yeah, I mean, as Shadow said, the gameplay is basic principles. You're going around in the Dimitrescu mansion and you're discovering new pathways and enemies and things that weren't really there before. There are folks that made fun of the reuse asset bit, and honestly, I mean, again, I can see where they're coming from in that department, because once again, it is like some of the same level, but they just remixed a lot of things and they add in new dangers and stuff like that, and I truly did not mind it as much, as long as they were doing something new and we weren't just backtracking, doing the same segment over and over again. It was really haunting stuff with some of those face eaters and the things chasing Rose around the entire mansion. So it was just an idea of how can we take this third person premise and make an entirely new game out of it, testing and experimenting and all that stuff, which were, for the most part, I know aesthetically it's kind of weird to see this character have powers and push people and all that stuff, but I didn't feel it was at a point where it was what's the word I'm looking for, way too broken and breaks the survival horror mode too much, because I mean, you have to use your powers sparingly because you don't get a lot of those white orbs that you can use it with, so you have to make sure use it, get out, and deal with the situation. So, and you don't get that many guns either. You just get the handgun and the shotgun, from what I noticed. So it is something that is a benefit to the character, which Capcom worked in quite well. I overall enjoyed it. Of course, there could have been more. Of course, there could have been more layers on top of it as usual. But for a 4-hour DLC for $20, along with getting some quality of life, I didn't think it was the worst package in the world. The only issue, like I said, would have been just more levels and layers on top of that than what we already got. But, it's pretty decent for the most part. So I will pass the baton over to Deva. Deva, can you hear us?
Oh, there you go. I was already talking about being muted. All right, me personally, since we are talking about gameplay, correct? I mean, I personally enjoyed it. I mean, the combination of only literally using just a couple of weapons and then the innate powers that she had. I mean, I felt like it was fine, and I mean, it did give a slight, additional to the whole dynamic of the gameplay by adding a little bit more of a resource management, as you guys mentioned before, in regards to using her powers, that we can't just spam it constantly, you know what I mean? Yeah, it would have been, I guess, a little bit overpowered if we were able to use that powers over and over, like where we'd be able to slow enemies down and whatnot. I mean, additional gameplay, I mean, yes, you mentioned the spoilers. I mean, the other half of Resident Evil Village, DLC, Shadow of Rose, is the fact that we don't really use the weapons, but we're inside the Beneviento house, and we kind of have to just navigate around a lot of the whole dolls and all that, and then just using that combination with her new powers. I mean, it was fun and it was haunting, to be honest. I mean, besides that, I feel like gameplay wise, I mean, yeah, we have it in third person, and we don't really get to enjoy the full immersion of the gameplay and Rose's powers till the very last fight, actually, right? So maybe I wish we could have gone that option where we would have been able to use all of our powers in some capacity a little bit longer. But besides that, I mean, like you guys said, I mean, it was an enjoyable DLC. I mean, I wish there was more of it. And though I might have to disagree with a lot of people here and all that, like they say like, this is the end of the Winter Saga, and I think that's coming from the devs themselves too. But it's just like, I mean, it ends exactly the way Resident Evil Village ended, with that whole like speculation of Ethan next to that car, right? You know, and to me, it's like it didn't further play into that. Like I thought we were gonna have a little bit more beyond that. You know what I mean? Like maybe like a cutscene here and there, but so it just tells me like, okay, you guys like say like, oh yeah, the Winter Saga is already done. I mean, but is it really? I mean, why give us that like last cliffhanger then? You know, but besides that, enjoyable DLC.
Next, we will hand the baton over to Deadman.
Thanks, Ren. As far as the Shadows of Rose DLC goes, I personally thought it was very, very enjoyable. Definitely took it back to kind of the survival horror that Seven was trying to do, at least there in the beginning. Because I can't think of any time that I ever truly felt safe. With most Resident Evil games, you get to a point where you're like, it doesn't matter what I run into. I got this. I can take care of it. And Shadows of Rose, all throughout the campaign, maybe I think fighting the final boss is the only time I actually felt safe. But all through the main campaign, it was very tense and very good with the survival horror aspects. I definitely liked the addition of the powers with Rose. Kind of hoping that whatever we might get next has something like that. Not anything that's like too stupidly broken, but it would still be cool if we had something that we could play with that was not just our guns. Like maybe a new division of the BSAA is going to be the, actual biomutated division or something, and that has to go clean up, but they go and clean up with their own powers. And I don't know, I just think that would be kind of neat for them to play off of in the future. But that's really it. It was very fun and enjoyable. Definitely very spooky all throughout.
All right. Let's see. So everyone has went so far. I wanted to chime in.
Go.
Oh, I forgot. Sorry, Sinzar. It is your turn.
Thanks. So yeah, I really enjoyed the whole DLC from beginning to end. I thought the mechanics were really good. And the way they had the Inception idea kind of tied in, where she's going into the Mutamycete and going through these memories one layer at a time, helped keep the pacing going, where you were just kind of moving from one area to the next, from the castle to the house, deeper into the stratum of the Megamycete, and the kept things going, kept things moving. And then in each area there was a new mechanic introduced, and I didn't think any area or any mechanic overstayed its welcome. I thought it was really, really well done. Her communicating with her father through that was a really clever way to show the player how to use things, and you were kind of learning with Rose. So I really like that aspect. I like when games do that, where they kind of tie the tutorials into the narrative a little bit. So that was really cool. I thought that was really well done. Even the boss fights, the boss fight with Evelyn in the house was really cool. I thought that was really well done to show how powerful she was within this universe that she's kind of been hibernating in since the end of 8. And I thought that was fun. Final boss fight was a little frustrating. I found it to be, I always find it frustrating when they introduce a brand new mechanic at the very end of a game, such as the dodging. I had no time to practice that and figure out how to make that work. So I was playing on the hardest difficulty, and I probably died upwards of 10 times on that final boss fight before I was able to get that dodging down. I was also playing on a mouse and keyboard, and they originally wanted you to press like Alt and something else, or F in a direction. It was a really weird keybind, so I had to play around to get my keybinds right. So that was a little frustrating, but all of that ties together. The resource management, I'm glad they carried that over from 8, where you're still crafting items to have that. But also the resource management of her powers, I thought was really good. You have said previously, a couple of the guys before me, how it just helps to keep that survival horror aspect there, where you're kind of tactically freezing enemies and running around them so you don't waste ammo just to get away. And I thought new enemies were introduced pretty relatively quickly, so there was always a new threat kind of around the corner. So overall, I thought the DLC was really great. It actually might be one of my favorite pieces of Resident Evil content, not only with the gameplay changes and kind of their experimentation with a new style within the universe of Resident Evil 8, but also the story. But we'll talk about that later.
Okay, I have a good side question, but it's gonna tie into question number 3. So, we have to talk about one of the most interesting segments of the game, and that is the dollhouse segment. So, this is probably the most scariest part of the game, and I want to get the opinions of the people who, experienced this for the first time and what was going through your mind when it happened. I want to start off with Black Shadow.
So, I think this was a bit of a gamble by the developers here. This is building off of the visit to the Beneviento Manor in the original game, of which there was a lot going on, and obviously a lot of people remember that as being like one of the scariest parts of the game. And we all remember like the freaking baby stuff. There was a lot of stuff happening, and again, this goes back into the whole kind of reusing of assets feature, and I guess this was kind of being looked at what's the best way to describe this? This is obviously like a retelling of it. This is kind of like Rose's version of it, and it was a great way of, like, in theory, of bringing this horror thing, especially if you play the original game. Once you go down the elevator and you open it and you realize where you are, you're like, here we go again, sort of thing. But it's difficult though, because it's like you've already played this trick once. When I think they did a very good job of it with Resident Evil Village, regards to Ethan's trip through. So doing it again for Shadows of Rose, I think, was kind of risky. But I think on the whole, they did a pretty decent job of it. I think they managed a fair, with kind of retelling it and, tailoring it specifically to target Rose, and kind of her fears, from school and her upbringing about being different. So I think on that side of things, they did pretty good, even if they did kind of mess around with certain bits and pieces, going on as well. I'm not gonna lie, the dolls are freaking creepy. They did a very, very good job of that. It is obviously pretty terrifying. And I think, on the whole, I think they did a pretty decent job. But I was, when I first realized, it was like I was kind of anticipating what was about to happen, but I was slightly worried because I was concerned they were going to perhaps struggle slightly to deliver it properly. I was perhaps concerned that they were going to manage to get things up and running sufficiently. But I think they did a pretty good job of it on the whole.
All right, Austin, it's your turn. Austin?
Yep. Takes a moment to unmute. So yeah, the dollhouse section. As many as you know, the freaking Beneviento house was my favorite section in Resident Evil Village, and revisiting it and making it even scarier. I don't know how they can make it scary. Oh, with a freaking Reaping Angel mannequin that moves, and you see it moving. That shit scared me so much. Especially, at first I was like, okay, I get this. This is simple, but the movements itself is very creepy. I was able to get to the end of it, and I was like, all right, cool. And then you get to the second phase of it, where the second one gets introduced. I didn't know it was behind me until I turned around. I was like, all right, I gotta run. I turn around, it's right in front of me. I freak out, and it gets me. And I was like, okay, this changed the whole another ball game. And then it gets even worse. And then you get a third one that also got me. And then there's a fourth one. Thankfully, I was able to get around that one, and I complete that entire section. And then you move on to the second part of the dollhouse phase. I was like, we're not done. Thankfully, the second part wasn't that bad. It was not as scary, but it was also like a puzzle itself, which I liked. I thought it was cool that you can actually stun the dolls and stun them with your power. I thought that was actually really, really neat. Albeit that it did use up a lot of your resources in many ways than one. I don't know, that the dollhouse section was by far one of the scariest things I've had to face in a long time, and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, there's nothing much to say else. It's just the best part in the game by far.
All right, Dev, I'm passing the baton over to you.
All right. Well, I actually completely agree with what Austin said. I mean, the Beneviento house or portion in Resident Evil Village was my favorite portion of the game as well. So here, just to try to figure out like what else can you do to make it scarier compared to the village section where Ethan went through it for the first time, because like you would think like, okay, well, we already knew or know what exactly was going to happen, right? And what they did this time, like, I mean, yes, it's all reused assets and whatnot, but like I feel like they did everything that they can to make it the best possible version of terror or whatever game mechanic pieces, lore, whatever that's surrounding inside the Beneviento house, I guess, best as possible. And you know what's funny? I'd like to add in, like, going back to RE Village, is the fact that when Ethan went through the Beneviento household, I mean, the main whole mechanic of it is like we lose all of our weapons, same with Rose this time around, but also it's the whole kind of like psychological, like tormenting throughout the our gameplay, where in Ethan's case, when we go into the actual heart of the household, we see that large mannequin of Mia, right? And it's kind of like it's a play on like that event where Chris killed her or supposedly killed her, right? And you know, because that mannequin has like the bullet hole and like, you know, and I don't know why, but Donna has this, you know, life-size mannequin of Mia. Well, this time, I mean, yeah, like we have the Mia doll, but she's actually there in pursuit of you. So it's like really messed up play of like, you know, seeing Rose, like maybe from Rose's perspective, seeing her life-size doll of her like mom trying to go after her, right? Not only that, the added portion of Evelyn tormenting you on top of that as well, and kind of reminding Rose of her childhood and like the way she was bullied by her like peers and all that, and how like she was being treated, with like some of the little hints of like the dolls like making fun of her, making little quotes, right, about like, you know, how her like, you know, how her powers are kind of made her a little different. And additional, well, I would say like gameplay wise, I mean, I like the whole stealth thing, you know, mechanic that, yeah, like, you know, if you're found out by the dolls and they're gonna stab you, and if you see that large Mia doll when you're like little bite-sized Rose, right, it's an instant kill. But like Austin said, the one that really terrified me was when you had the life-size Mia doll chasing after you, like in that little game of statues. So you kind of have to just keep, you know, your eye on the doll so they won't move. So you're like, all right, well, I'm pretty familiar with the Beneviento house and the whole layout, so you could back up just enough where like you'll get like a little bit of a distance. The only problem is the moment you kind of like turn around, you could hear it stomping and just trying to chase after you. Not only that, there's gonna be like several of them by the end chasing after you. So other than that, I mean, I feel like it was a great portion of the game. I wish it was a little bit longer. I mean, a lot of people, I've been told by many other people, like it's kind of really like half and half, that they either absolutely loved it or they hated it because they didn't like the whole supernatural feel coming from a Resident Evil game. And I understand, coming from his roots, like it's like really based on like biology, viral infections and whatnot, to now like with superpowers, kind of like ghostly, kind of like, you know, supernatural kind of stuff. I completely understand what they're coming from, but as just a regular horror fan, like, you know, I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go next. So I mean, I just think that they were trying to do something a little bit different, you know what I mean? And the hallucination drug thing is the example of that, and the dollhouse happening, you know, because I mean it takes place in our minds, so you obviously know some weird shit is gonna go down. That's the first thing that I suspected in this DLC when I saw the Rose clones all over the place. I think Maximilian, he said it best. He said something equivalent to the fact of, if Capcom decided to make a full psychological horror game and make it 100%, just like Baby and the Dollhouse section, it would rake in a lot of money, and a lot of people would probably be down for an idea like that. I know I would. So yeah, that's something to keep into mind, and that's what I was thinking during the entire time, because it's something so simple where it's just like you're looking at the doll, and if you look at it, it'll stop in its place. And if you move around the corner or something, it starts moving. It's something so simple as a gameplay mechanic, but is 100% fully scary, because what started to happen in my experience was I was thinking, oh, this is going to be cake. I just look at it, it doesn't move, that's it. And then more dolls started to come behind me, and I'm like, I know where this is going now. What's gonna happen is they're gonna try to move on me as I'm looking at one doll, and I gotta pay attention to the other one, so I have to open my full field of view. And it's one of those great things where it's like, it could only work really, I think, in third person, because once the dolls start getting like behind you, very close to the side, it'd be probably hard to see them. In first person, maybe in first person that could work, you never know, but I just feel like it accommodated this new gameplay style, and something that they tried out, and I think it was heavily effective. I think it was effective to the game, the environment, everything. And what I really liked about it the most was I saw it coming a mile away with the doll in the hallway. I'm like, oh, this is just, they're gonna take my weapons away, and they did that. They're gonna jump scare me, and they did that. And then all of a sudden, I was just like in this dark room. So I was like, I'm waiting for it to happen, and it's just effectively so good. So I would argue it's one of the best parts. I do feel though that the later section where you're like tiny as a mushroom, and you're just running around as this small like miniature person, and it's a lot of dolls trying to kill you. That part I kind of thought that was just like a little break from what you experienced before. But yeah, someone said it best, fuck the Biavento house. It's, if they did make a whole game off that, I probably would have a heart attack, and I will love it. So it's just one of those things where I think they should take it into consideration. I understand supernatural elements, I don't know about that in Resident Evil, but at the same time, if you're an open-minded person and you love horror like this, I find it really hard to hate. That's how I feel about it mostly. I'm gonna pass the baton to Deadman.
Yeah, I pretty much feel the same way as everybody else. I don't know if it's my favorite section in the game, but the Bienvenido house is definitely the most memorable section. And I kind of assumed that we would just be in the castle the whole thing, kind of similar to how we all thought that it might just be the castle whenever 8 was first announced. And then we got out of the castle, and I was like, oh, cool, where are we going next? And it just kind of started leading up to the walkway, and I was just like, oh no, the whole way I was walking up. Because as soon as I hit the house, I was like, oh, god damn it, they're going to do another one of those things again, aren't they? And I thought the baby thing was bad. Like, I just was horrible. I kept screaming, no baby, through my whole playthrough. And as soon as, like you were saying, Ren, as soon as I saw the Mia statue, whatever, standing up outside, I was like, oh fuck, they're gonna do this shit, aren't they? And then they started doing the weeping angel shit, and that is one of the things that will set me off on like a hair trigger. That it's one of the things that'll freak me out the most. I still remember the first playthrough I had. I made it to the bedroom and got the thing, and the Mia thing creeped into the room. I was like, okay, this is fine. I can just back out of the room and it'll be okay. And I didn't know there was a second one out there. And it got me, and I screamed so hard I threw my controller, and I just quit that for at that point at the night, at the end of the night. But it was definitely memorable the second go round, and one of my favorite sections in this part of the DLC. It did even more the second time to scare the shit out of me than the first time, and I thought that was really impressive, because the first time, it had everyone on edge, and they took away your weapons and did everything. They did that all perfectly in the base game, and I can't believe that, at least for me, that they did it so much extra that it ended up scaring me even more than the base game, and I thought that was just so great.
Okay, Zamzar, it's your turn. How'd you feel about the dollhouse segment?
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with mostly everybody here where it was my favorite part of the DLC, hands down. From first entering the house with all the welcome rows and the monkey bear stuffies everywhere, to the point where you're just like cutting open one of them to get that first doll piece, and that whole puzzle, solving those puzzles and getting more of Rose's backstory was really nice, to kind of see where she was coming from, why she wanted to get rid of these powers, that she's kind of learning about with the player as they're going through the story. So you kind of feel for her, like, okay, yeah, I could see why you would want to get rid of these awesome powers you have, to kind of just be a normal kid. And that kind of just all goes through, all of that up until the point where you're fighting those weeping angel type mannequin creatures that are, when you don't look at them, they start coming at you. So I thought that was really fun to go through and kind of shepherd these mannequins and kind of keep an eye on them and be like, okay, I could turn this way for like just a few seconds, get done what I need to do, and then turn back and watch them, or kind of baiting them to go certain ways so you have an opening to get out while you're watching them. I thought that was really fun. And then eventually, you get shrunk down Alice in Wonderland style, and you have these giant dolls coming at you. And I think one of the most gruesome deaths are when those little dolls see you and they come rushing after you, especially when there's a group of them and they're just stabbing you to death. That was pretty gruesome. But yeah, going through all that was really fun. I had a good time with that, and up until the point where you're getting chased. But yeah, I overall like that sequence. But when it culminates into her going back into her childhood home and seeing all the memories of her father, things that she's seeing for the first time, I just thought that was like a really heavy emotional point that kind of, I think it's probably one of the most emotional moments and sequences in any Resident Evil game, but it just really hammered home the whole psychology of that section. And then you get out of that and you finally fight Evelyn at the end of that whole sequence, and it's just that ending, that the 1-2 punch of her finally learning about her dad through these memories, and then fighting Evelyn with him, and seeing how powerful she is. I thought was a really good sequence. I think it just starts slow with the puzzles and ends with a bang, and then kicks you off into the third act, where you're going to finish the story. So yeah, I think it's a great act two to the DLC, and I thought it was easily my favorite part of the whole game.
Okay, so we're gonna go into story now in terms of the story, characterizations, notes that you may have discovered in the game, as well as the ending and thoughts on that and how you felt about that. So I'm going to start off with Austin.
Alrighty, back to me, I guess. Let me just pull it up. How about the feel of the story about the characters within Shadow Rose? The story and the characters, I mean, you start off with, you meet one of the characters. I can't remember his name because he's barely in it. And you don't really get introduced to many characters. You just learn more about Rose and the dealings she has at school and how she feels. And you get... okay. K9. It's alright because he was never there. That is true. He was never there. Yeah, and he's one of Chris's men, if I believe that is correct. And that's cool and all. It's just that he was an illusion the entire time, which is kind of crazy, but also makes some sort of sense how they explain the Megamycete and stuff. Like, the story, I would say, is good. If you is good, it's just that there's just a lot of like, okay, plot holes that they try to fill in at the end. You're like, okay, I guess that makes sense. But I like Rose as a character. I thought, you think she's like this kind of snobby, bratty girl, but you learn throughout playing the entire game is that she's like been mistreated by others. She's been like subjugated to like prejudice because of her mold abilities, and people don't understand what she's going through. and you sort of feel sympathy towards her, and it makes sense because like this is Ethan's daughter. Like she doesn't deserve this kind of stuff. Like she lost her dad died protecting her and saving her, and she's left these powers. And very early on, I found out that was like Michael's probably Ethan, just the way that he's talking to her, the way that he expresses it. I found it really funny how Michael would say some things like here, this and this, and their banter between each other was actually pretty sweet, all in all. And you just like the reverse Duke, like evil Duke. I thought he was interesting. They just didn't do much with him. I was like, oh, that's a bit of a shame. Like I would have like either fought him or just learned why is the Duke this evil creature? Is it based around a different side of him? Is it him? Like I would love to know more about the background lore between this world and the others. But all in all, I really liked it. I mean, like Miranda showed up again, which I thought was cool because even though Miranda was this like really hidden like antagonist throughout the game of the original, it's cool that she was just, like she still had some influence in trying to get her Eve back. I was like, damn, this is some like Parasite Eve type of like storyline going on here, and the fact that she had to, Rose had to. It was a thing created by Miranda. I guess it was. Like I remember reading the notes, and it's just a little hard connecting the dots. But all in all, I like Rose as a character. I thought she was actually a pretty fun protagonist, especially with Michael / Ethan. The duo I thought was really cute and fun to go play with. I thought the story was fine. I thought it helps showcase why she accepted her powers, and that the ending showcase, I was like, oh, now it makes sense why we had this ending to the original game. All in all, I thought the story and the characters were fun. There's some characters they should have done more with, but it didn't really hurt the game overall. It didn't hurt the DLC overall. Wish there was more, but I'm fine as it was. So that's all I have, really.
Next up is Shadow. It's your turn.
So, as I mentioned a little bit early on, like I think there's two ways to take the sort of the more storyline of it. Obviously, it's meant to tie into the original game, and obviously, which was already being hinted at originally with the ending for Village. I think that as a kind of self-contained sort of project, as I said, I think it delivered generally on what it needed to do. With Rose, obviously she's kind of resentful of her ability. She thinks it makes her sort of different. She has come to accept them. Gets offered a chance to get rid of them, which is what she's wanted, and so she jumps on it. And then we later find out that it was all a trick from Miranda to try and lure her back into the Megamycete stuff. And obviously, then from there, it delves, into an exploration of herself, about the things that haunt her. The regret that she doesn't get to see her father. And I will say that there's the part where you revisit the old household from when she was a kid. She's like seeing these old memories. I think was actually definitely somewhat touching. And that was probably my highlight of the game was her reading the letter and that's really really sweet. I do slightly worry that there are some parts of the story that maybe are, when you kind of delve into it, are kind of a bit don't necessarily have a lot of closure. The whole Megamycete thing, for example, like basically everything that was happening was largely an illusion. So although we had like this fight with Miranda, for example, does that actually have any lasting impact? Like, is she actually dead, or if we just kind of destroyed a facsimile of her? You could probably go both ways on that. But I think on the main plot points of her exploration of her relationship with her father, and sort of getting that moment, definitely delivered. And even just some of the ancillary stuff of the ancillary stuff of like the Rose clones and the reasoning for that, and why the Duke exists, and the fact that it's not actually him. It's self-contained. You're left kind of trying to guess what it is going on for a lot of the time, and you finally manage to get that that resolution of that story once you kind of have the lore dive towards the back end, explaining what Miranda was doing and why she was doing it. So I think in that respect, it totally delivered. And as I said, I would have no complaints story-wise. That's all.
All right, so Dev, it's your turn.
I personally think the whole story and the lore within this DLC is the strongest point of this, obviously the DLC. And if you got, obviously, for people who don't know, like, I mean, I really delve into this lore behind the whole Megamycete, Mother Miranda's plan and why she was using, or how she was using it, how she came about, like, discovering it, right? And, like, how this led through, like, over 100-year kind of, like, I would say step-by-step kind of progression or evolution where you finally end up with Rose, right? Mother Miranda's experiments with the Megamyces ends up like, helping like create Evelyn, right? Because she gave the a sample of the mold to the Connections, which is a crime syndicate, right, within Resident Evil. And they create Evelyn, hence Evelyn, infected Rose's, parents and whatnot, and Ethan. And then in the end we get Rose. And this, in a way, yes, it's like a self-contained story, but I feel like if you put in the grand scheme of the whole like mold, Megamycete, and all that, like it finally kind of makes a really good sense in a way. It kind of gives you like a great, structured, like, okay, how the Megamycete really truly works and how this background or this backbone helps kind of explain like what you see with Rose, right? Because for those who you don't know, it's that the main premise of the Megamycete is its ability to kind of like what do they call, like, absorb the information of those who passed away within this proximity, right? Hence that's why we kind of have like the settings of like the Beneviento or like the Dimitrescu, where like all those like scattered memories of Miranda and all that, like it's being put together in front of us, and it's kind of like you guys said, it's like a whole big hallucination, right? And in terms of story wise, where Rose was the like the one exploring through all this like these events, it's kind of like I really liked it. I mean, it's nice that we get to see from her perspective of how things were, especially with her powers, right? Because like she literally is the culmination of what you could probably say like is the best version of somebody who was infected with a mold, right? I mean, yes, there is Mother Miranda who was able to show powers and whatnot, shapeshift and whatnot, but I mean, even her, even she did mention that Rose is the legitimate, perfect vessel for her daughter Ava, and she sees how powerful Rose truly was, and it's just great to see it from Rose's point of view and how things were playing out. I forgot who mentioned it as we were going through the story. Like, there was this like, I think story wise, it really did hit deep in terms of trying to get you into that kind of emotional state where it's like, wow, like you go through Ethan's memories inside their old home, right? And you go through every little section, and you go through every little item, and you could hear Ethan's voice and whatnot. And then at the end, you see Rose's reaction to all of this, finding out like how her father like really loved her and all that. Like, I feel like it's really compelling, and it was really, really nice to see that, especially after knowing the background of the story with Rose. It's kind of like, it's a great moment for her. Even though she went through all this stupidness of being treated really badly by her peers, it's that fact that somebody this whole time was who like really loved her, with obviously Ethan. And on top of this, I like the whole dynamic, how they played with Evelyn during that section, because like here you are having a great great moment with like memories of your father, but then you have Evelyn just literally just pop out right behind you and like just absolutely hates Rose, right? Because she literally sees Rose as a way, kind of like she's projecting her own insecurities in a way that like that was supposed to be kind of her like life in a way. Like she was the one who was supposed to be special, but instead she was seen as this just regular bioweapon that's been like mishandled, right, in Resident Evil 7. Now seeing her in the Megamycete and all these hallucinations, kind of like you can see how that culmination is being projected towards Rose and how she treats her, right? Beyond that, like I agree with like a lot of what you guys said before. I mean, like I like how Mother Miranda's like reintroduced and kind of like gives more files or like research notes more like in regards to the Megamycete. And besides that, I mean, yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed the story.
Okay, so it's my turn. I like this plot. I'm not gonna lie. I think Deva brought it up like best, where he mentioned that really emotional moment at the end where Ethan finally talks to her and reveals like, you know, how he loved her and everything, and they were talking and he was like sitting there dying. I thought that was really well done because once again, if you went from Village to this game, then you'll understand that when Rose grew up, she never really had her parents with her, her real biological parents. I think they said in the story that Mia lost custody and then Ethan obviously died. So it was only Chris being there when she needed someone the most. And even then, it wasn't her biological dad. So there's the bullying that they had, which is once again very serious topic. It kind of reminded me a bit of Silent Hill with Alessa Gillespie, and she was getting like all bullied and stuff like that, and Rose was experiencing some of the same trauma. So you know, I can see they tried to do the stepping stones of another tragic protagonist, which I didn't mind. I don't mind Resident Evil having like differing flavors from tragic protagonists to people that are super agents that could suplex stuff like Chris or Leon. So it's always different flavors. This definitely gave more context to the Village ending because, at least as far as you know, Ethan and Rose did have that conversation before he sort of just passed on, and then you can see that the Megamycete still has the conscious still up, so he's really not gone anywhere if he's walking beside the car. I did think though it was a little bit disappointing in the fact that you don't really get any teases or hints at all to what's next, which is something that goes into the next question. But they really just gave you the previous ending with more context, and it's fine. But if you're yearning for more, if you're seeking more, then you're probably not gonna get it with this DLC with the end cutscene. But for what they did for characters and story and lore, it was pretty fine for the most part. Although, like I said, I knew something was up. I knew something was going to go down in the Megamycete when they said that people can impart themselves and other people after they passed away. So I was expecting Ethan and Evelyn to show up. It's only a matter of time, and I felt like since those two kind of passed on and that Rose was quote unquote the living embodiment of the perfect molded, it was gonna happen sooner or later. That's why I saw through the Michael thing with the notes on the wall, and I was like, okay, there's no way this random guy is like just trying to guide her out of this experience. It has to be Ethan. The survival instincts just made it like super obvious throughout the plot. As for Miranda coming back, like I said, I kind of expected that as well. It kind of just sucks though on one half where it's like those are the only two lords that really came back, like Miranda and of course the Duke. And honestly, he was in the story for a bit and then he just sort of like dropped off. So I was hoping like maybe we would see some more twisted amalgamations of them actually in the plot, but you know, like maybe Moreau or something, or seeing Donna a little bit more because she was heavily underrepresented in the main game. Although I'll take what I can get because what's there is honestly good, and it was fine, you know, having I don't know if we talked about this part, but there was like these crazy god powers and Rose using like trees to impel Miranda, and I was like, you know, this is super dumb, but this is the greatest thing ever. So once I was doing that, I was like, I'm just doing these super like Kamehameha tree bark impalements to this woman, and it's fantastic. So I definitely got satisfaction out of it. But yeah, you and Michael as well, like he was just, it was just way too out there to say, hey, this is definitely Ethan 100%. And the same thing for Kay as well. Like I knew he was, something was weird. At first it was weird. People were saying he was Chris. I was like, no, I don't believe that. They're not gonna show Chris until like much later. Not even in this game yet, in terms of him being old and in the other timeline. But still, like I said, it leaves unanswered questions. But in terms of enjoyment and your sheer enjoyment of Villager's story as a continuation, I really appreciated it 100%. So I will pass the baton to Deadman.
I agree with everybody else. I mean, it was a great little kind of fun side story. I did, the whole Michael being Ethan thing. I mean, that's pretty obvious. I think within like the first one or two things that he said, I was like, oh yeah, that's Ethan. Especially because if you think about how it is in the lore, she's in the Megamycete, and the Megamycete absorbs like everyone's essence whenever they die. So, I mean, the only person that we would know of that would help her is Ethan. But it was still nice to see that, kind of in a weird beyond death type thing, he still got to spend time with and save his daughter. Just especially as, somebody who is a parent, seeing all of that it just hit me. It hit me really hard, especially when she went to the house and got to see all of their mementos and see how much Ethan cared about her. It was just great. Um, Overall, I mean, I don't hate that Mother Miranda is the villain again, especially because we got our Dragon Ball Z fight at the end. But it would have been kind of nice to see something new done with it. But I liked Mother Miranda in the main campaign, so seeing her again wasn't a huge bother for me. I like her and her story. Um, and then just kind of beyond everything else that's been said, I don't think I have anything additional to add other than just I really liked the father and daughter and closure aspect. It was kind of odd that we didn't get to see anything from any of the other main cast during the future. I did think it was kind of neat that the story got tied up. The end of Resident Evil 8 is where the DLC ends, because originally I thought the DLC was going to be after that specific point, but it was kind of neat to see that it just looped back around to now we have context.
Zemzar, what about you?
Yeah, I really liked the story with this one, and I liked how it tied up the Ethan Winters and just the Winters family saga really nicely, while potentially setting up some other things. So it answered a good bit of questions with the Megamycete and the Mutamycete, and like people have said before, how it works and what the goal is for that. Like, why are they even doing this? And it kind of answered that question. It's going in and it's stealing memories, and you can kind of relive those. So you can kind of see where that would be beneficial in, military tactics or any sort of kind of weapons of war kind of situation. Obviously that's what Umbrella and everything, that's what everything is building to. That's why they do what they do. It's, weapons of war, but they're bioweapons. So it was kind of cool to get an answer on that and a kind of definitive look at what that could be through Rose. Like, that is necessary, like that could be maybe not necessarily what they're going for, but something that happens out of their research of this Mutamycete. You get these powers to control it, so that might be beneficial for them to have. And you kind of see how Rose is still, has been kind of exploited her whole life and kind of talked down on her whole life because of what she has with these powers, with the school kids, with the way Kay and the other agents treat her. You can kind of see that they see her differently. They kind of see her as a tool, not a person. Which would be crushing as a teenager or a young adult. So it's kind of cool to see that perspective, and then you understand why she would want to get rid of those, and then she ultimately realizes that these powers are something that she would want to keep and hold on to because she could do more good with them than without. So she has that turn at the end where she finally says, I'm going to hold on to these powers, I'm going to keep this, smashes the crystal and goes on. So it's kind of one of those things where you're like, oh, cool, like she had this turn, she learned something about herself. But at the same time, it's like, your dad just went through all of this, for you, to save you, to make your life better, and also guided you through all of this because he thought you wanted to get rid of your powers. And then at the end, and the very end, you have this decision where you're like, oh, I'm not doing that anymore. Like, you could have avoided all of this if you just kept it from the beginning. But she has to go through that to learn that, go through everything she did in the game to learn that that about herself. So kind of frustrating on that end. But I'm kind of glad that they didn't show Chris or bring him into this. They kept it within the Winters family. They didn't bring anybody from outside of just these past 3 games, these main characters in these past 3 games into the DLC, which kept it really focused and on Ethan and his relationship with Rose, and more so Rose's relationship with Ethan, not growing up with a father. And like we've said before, that sequence in the house is easily one of the most emotional and impactful moments in a Resident Evil game. I know my chat was like talking about people cutting onions in their house, like they didn't, we didn't expect that from a Resident Evil game. So it was a nice change of pace. It was cool to see that, okay, in the Resident Evil universe, you can have these emotional moments and they don't come off as like cringy or cheesy. They come off really well when done right. So I'd like to see more of that in Resident Evil 9. But yeah, I overall enjoyed the story. I enjoyed all the little tidbits of information we got from the notes and everything, and why we learned why Rose was valuable, why people were after Rose, and what they wanted to do with her, whether that's save her or use her for their own ends. So yeah, ultimately I thought it was a really well done story, and excited for what's next.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to an extension of the story question here, and honestly, it's talking about any additional thoughts on people thinking about why there wasn't any RE9 questions addressed in the plot line, and how do you feel about it, and if so, where do you think they could be leading? I'll start off with Austin first.
All right. Additionally, what were your thoughts on Capcom not answering any Resident Evil 9 questions in this plotline? I think mainly because they wanted to wrap up the Winter Saga first, and because apparently just Resident Evil 9 is just either not going to do with any of them or will hardly reference them. They're not the main focus for sure, and what is considered the final number title is what they're claiming, which I can see it being the final one, but we'll see when it actually comes around. I do feel like though that they're not ready to like showcase anything of 9. I think 9 is still like a ways away. Like we still got Resident Evil 4 remake to get through. We still have possibly other side titles that they want to dish out, maybe some other DLC, who knows. But I don't think we'll be seeing Resident Evil 9 to like any information about it either at the end of 2023 or beginning of 2024. But that's how I see it, since Resident Evil 9 is probably going to be like one of their biggest games they're going to make in a while. Like, I'm not saying all their other games were not big, but this one's probably going to be like their biggest title to date, is how I would say it. But I don't have anything against it. I rather focus on what they said they were focusing in the first place, is that this is the Winter Saga, this is the nail in the coffin to this, and we're just going to give them a nice send off, and it is up to the future to see if they are referenced or not, and I'm fine with that, really.
Shadow, buddy, what do you think about this?
Yeah, so I have speculated plenty on a few of these podcasts about Resident Evil 9, about what I think it's going to involve, and the direction I think it's going to take. The TLDR being that it ultimately has absolutely nothing to do with Shadows of Rose, and I think that was the purpose of this. This was really kind of not had. This didn't have any purpose trying to build towards Resident Evil 9. That wasn't the goal. I think the target here was simply just to, you had the storyline that spawned out of nowhere. And I don't really believe when Resident Evil 7 was made that there was this intention. I don't think that they were going to end up going this far down this route. I honestly don't think that was the intention, but I don't know. So I think there's a practical side of it that I don't think there was any intention for this to have anything to do with the upcoming Resident Evil 9. I think there's also possibility the case that they might not be 100% sure what direction they want to take with 9. Resident Evil 9 is a long way ahead. So there's no need for them to necessarily commit themselves to do something, which they then decide later on that oh, actually, maybe this isn't a direction we want to take, storyline or plot line wise. But then they've already laid the market, so they're kind of going back on it. So I think there's a little bit of protection on their own side for that as well. So that might just be being cynical. I mean, and I think also at the end of the day, if this did have, all these sort of things, like, oh, this leads up to Resident Evil 9, does that make this better? Does this make this a more complete DLC that it has all these things that are clearly leading up to the next game? I don't really think that it does. I don't think it makes any difference either way. I don't think it's a prerequisite, and I don't think it doesn't have to lead into the next game, which. When are we going to see Resident Evil 9? We're not seeing it this year. We're not seeing it next year, most likely. So it's going to be a long time till we see it. And if you had left all these little lead-in tidbits on this DLC for this game, like in a year, 18 months, 2 years' time, are you going to remember any of this? I don't think so. So I get why some people may have been expecting it, but I never went into this at all expecting anything like that. Maybe the only thing was maybe a slight bit of extra closure on who the individual is that walks up to the car at the end, which we see again at the end of the DLC, which if you're not aware who it is, go look it up. It's and I don't know if it means anything or they just use the same model. I don't know. That's nothing for me to work with, but there's no need to get angry about it. It's fine, kids. We'll learn more about it as we go. It wasn't necessary, and I don't think it would have made the game any better if you'd thrown all this stuff in. I think if anything, it just kind of hamstrings them further down the line because they've got all these little markers that they have to follow up on. At least now they've got a nice fresh blank slate to work with, which I think is what they're going to need for this full circle going around, finishing Resident Evil 9.
Deva, it's your turn. If he can hear us. Oh no. Well, I guess I can go next. So, this is okay. I bought this up because I saw there were people sort of mad about this in the RE community, saying that it's a crime they didn't show more of what happens later on and stuff like that, and I kind of get where it's coming from because just a little sneak peek and stuff like that. I get it, but I do agree with what most people are saying where they said we don't know what direction this game is going in because this is quote unquote rumored to be an RE game that is going to be the longest in development with all the titles they had previously before it. So if that is true, I'm really not expecting to see this until maybe 2024 or something like that. I think that game is going to be that far off late 2024, maybe 2025, because they have the monumental task of needing to clear up the stories with all the main leads, maybe some of the side leads, and explaining what in the hell has happened. And I would agree, what I'm going to say next, that's a more of a technicality on Capcom's part, where they sort of introduced this idea that, yes, we're going to jump 16 years into the future. I do think part of that, they not even part, just a lot of it, they have to talk about what happened to the world in these 16 years, what occurred with the characters in this time jump. People change a lot during that time. Are they going to address any of that? So it's a lot of question marks brought to the table. I think this is equivalent to, and I said this on other podcasts before, it's equivalent to when they decided to put viruses on the black market as a way to fill in more blanks and add a means to have the series continue further down the road once Wesker was dead or something. It's like a contingency plan. That being said, so it's not if they have that in play, it's not like they don't know what they're doing. But I do think they wanted the sole focus to be on Rose. They wanted to focus on Rose. And I told someone in this live stream not too long ago that when I really think about it critically, I don't think they could have crammed all of that into a 4-hour DLC, because if they decided to shoehorn some stuff in, then more people are going to be asking questions as opposed to a full-fledged game. So I was like, if they were to do something like that, they might as well make like a standalone full game, and it has to be like 10-20 hours, and even that wouldn't be enough. Like, why not just put all that resource to RE9? So I totally get it after looking at the bigger picture, and I think those answers are going to come soon. I'm not sure about sooner than later, but RE9 is definitely going to be a game far away. We already have like more supplemental content like RE4 remake, so there's going to be a lot to play. I think there's also probably going to be another RE game that releases in the back half of 2023, because I think Capcom might know that this game is going to take a long time, and they have other projects as well, so they can't just be 100% beholden to RE rushing that game out in 2023. So I think it's coming out 2024. That is my opinion for now. I'm gonna see if Deva's back. Deva, are you back? Are you alive?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
So we're talking about additional things with thoughts on Capcom not answering Resident Evil 9. Gosh, it's like I kind of touched on this with my take from earlier, where it's like they say it was already the end of the Winter Saga, but is it really though? I mean, especially with that last cliffhanger, right? Like, why give us that? You know what I mean? Like, why not give us if it was the end of the Winter Saga, why end it with, even with the Rose DLC? Why end it with the exact same ending from Resident Evil Village? Why not give us an extra cutscene to kind of see like, okay, well, this is the aftermath after Rose learns about, you know, what's going on with, you know, with herself, or like inside the Megamycete, and her dad really was there for her this whole time. Not only that, I mean, there are things that need to be played out too, like, you know, I mean, the whole BSAA situation, right? I think that BSAA going bad is a great plot that needs to be delved in. I mean, even from Chris's point of view, by the end of Resident Evil Village, what was the last thing he did or say, right? Like, he wanted to go back to BSAA headquarters in Europe, right? Like, that was the whole point. You're like, okay, well, great. We're going to see what's going on. Like, why are they using bioweapons? I mean, is this all set up for Resident Evil 9? Possibly. But the thing is, though, it's so entangled with the whole, you know, bioweapons with Chris, and then there's Rose, and this whole timeline of like in the span of 16 years. I mean, like, it's becoming a bit convoluted to kind of like, you know, and not only that, does that mean that like Resident Evil 9 will play on beyond the after 16 years where we played as Rose? I mean, I think that would be the only way to go about it, because I mean, it can't be in between, because it's like, okay, well, wouldn't, if something so significant would ever happened, I mean, we already knew that Chris is still alive, right? Because when we were playing with playing as Rose, so it's like, okay, well, now we know Chris is still alive, so whatever plot they have, you know, playing on Chris might die, is like, that's dead, that's gone already, right? So it's like, and then we hear about like additional rumors about Resident Evil 9. I mean, about like oh my god, I forgot who mentioned it before, but it was like, you know, it was a plot that was gonna focus kind of like on like the Wendigo, kind of like, you know, I'm not sure, please don't, like, you know, I might be completely wrong on this, but I thought that was mentioned, and I thought that kind of like approach to Resident Evil going more into the supernatural. I mean, as a horror fan, I would love it, but I could see where the majority of Resident Evil fans may take in like somehow, or might have some reservations in regards to that. So with Capcom being really quiet, and we know for a fact that most likely it is in development and has been in development for the last couple of years. I mean, it's really hard to tell like which direction they're gonna go. Are they gonna go more horror? Or are they going to go back to the traditional Resident Evil, using bioweapons, viruses, new species, and all that? Like, are they going to go that route? You know, it's just really hard to tell right now. But other than that, that's it.
Okay, Deadman, your turn. What do you think about the lack of RE9 stuff? How do you feel about it?
Sorry about that. I was having some trouble unmuting.
Oh no, it's fine.
So I mean, I'm not super bothered by it. I much rather prefer writing that leans into, we can kind of have this closed off, this, closed-ended narrative, and then leave it kind of open for another thing rather than leave it on a cliffhanger. So, and especially considering Capcom doesn't really seem like they fully know the direction of what's going to go or what's going to happen next. And just by how there's been no word of anything from Resident Evil 9, for the most part, I'm not super bothered by how it ends here. I'm not super crazy on the time skip as with most people. So I'm kind of hoping that it gets a pin in it. So like we leave this end of the story until like Resident Evil, let's just say 10 or 11 or whatever side story that they have. So that way we can still kind of work our way up to that point in the actual timeline. And then the end of 8 will converge with wherever else in the timeline the 16 years would go. Because I mean, I don't completely hate this time skip, but as far as that big of one, it definitely is weird from any kind of standpoint, considering that Capcom has never done anything like that with Resident Evil. I mean, we get a few years here and there, but never anything like 16. That's way too much, especially considering that by that point, I think all of the OG characters are going to be in their 50s or pretty damn close to pushing their 60s. And not saying they can't be a badass at that age. I mean, take a look at Isaac Clarke. He's like 50 by the time Dead Space 3 rolls around, and he's still kicking ass. But just to have that much of a gap where we don't know anything about our main characters is extremely odd. So mostly I'm just kind of hoping that that Resident Evil 9 doesn't proceed from that 16-year mark. I hope that they take some time to build up other stuff to that point in the timeline before they commit to the 16-year jump. Otherwise, there's no telling how 9 or anything beyond is going to look.
All right, Zanzara, it is your turn.
Yeah, I think it's fine, much like everybody else said here. I think if they tried to get into too much what happens after the Winter Saga, after the time jump, it's just going to be a bloated mess. It needed to be focused on Rose and that relationship with her and Ethan. It didn't need to be any more than that. We weren't getting a Resident Evil 9, so why do we even need to talk about it? I'm glad that they didn't include much from Chris during the or at all during the DLC, I should say. But it sets up 9. I think if they jump off from here and go into 9 right after the final events where Rose drives off with those two agents, I think that would be a good setup. I've said it before. I think Resident Evil 9 should be the end of the story for these main characters if they really are wanting to go that anthology route. But I think there is an opportunity for Chris and Rose to have something happen between them where, Chris sacrifices himself either for her or for the quote unquote greater good, whatever that may be, and then bring in some other older characters for the duration of 9 and kind of wrap up their story. Maybe Rose is a little bit guarded, doesn't trust these characters. I think they should bring Jill back. I think they should bring Claire back for the last game, since they were there for the beginning and we haven't really seen much from them in recent years. And I think it does set up that kind of launching point for that. They could go a completely different direction and completely say, okay, we're not worrying about the Winter Saga at all. That's said and done. We're going to start completely fresh and dive into some other territory. But I think it would be, I think the Winter stuff has been so popular for them not to include some of it in Resident Evil 9 would be a big disservice to fans of that. So. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I don't think it could have done any better. I'm fine with them not including Resident Evil 9 stuff in there. They don't need to do that. They didn't need to do that, and I'm glad they didn't.
I agree 100%. It is one of those things where it's like the game needs to be massive, and I don't think a DLC is enough to hold all that story content. That's why when someone asks me that, I'm like, now that I think about it, I don't think 4 hours is enough to explain all that. It would have to be much, much longer, and that was not the best idea in the end. So we're moving on to the next question. Has anyone else played the new Mercenaries mode and the new updates that they established before I move on so I can make this faster?
Not really.
Silence in the room.
Okay, I guess it was only me. So
Actually, I did play Mercs.
okay, so I'm gonna go first, and then I'm gonna let you go, Austin, to give your opinion, and then we'll move to the next one. So I've played with the new characters, which is Chris Redfield, Heisenberg, and Lady D. I'm gonna start with Chris. Chris is a powerhouse. I love him. The fact that he can just do falcon punches to people is super great. He can stomp. I've noticed his guns are pretty basic. You got the Dragon, and then you have the pistol, but you can upgrade everything as natural. But his thing is he has onslaught. So onslaught is where you build his meter up, and then once his meter's full, he can run faster and he can do more damage when punching enemies, and that's what I kind of comboed that with auto onslaught and just punching everything in sight like I was Doom Guy. It's one of the most thrilling experiences ever to go through Mercs with Chris Redfield just punching the shit out of everything. And I had a lot of fun with that. I've only played a little bit with Lady D, but for the most part, I'm trying to understand all our weapons, but I guess it's funny to throw a throne chair at the enemies and see them explode, and they take like about 6,000 damage, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous. She's super, again, she's tall as a goddamn tree in the sky, so because of this, you kind of have to press the crouch button to get through doors, which I thought was kind of cute because it's like she's got to be from like 8 feet tall to 6 to fit in any of these doorways, so that makes perfect sense when fighting the enemies. The same claw attacks come in, you can just slice people up. She has like some sort of bloodlust. She can shoot like the bees from the daughters. It's essentially that, but she has like a giant cigarette lighter that does that or whatever, and she shoots the bees at the people. I didn't play with her for long, but she was entertaining. She was fun. And Heisenberg is just basically Thor on steroids. He has his hammer. You can electrify it. You can also like go around and shoot saw blades at people, make them ricochet with the particular skills in the game. I just think that playing this mode in particular, it is a nice quality of life from just playing as Ethan, where he has basic weapons. These people have abilities. They could do things. They could summon like giant robots to knock into people and explode like Heisenberg. So it felt like a welcome addition because the game was just bare bones and lacking with Mercenaries compared to how it originally was in Resident Evil Village. So it's much appreciated. I have not played the harder stages, but so far it's fun annihilating the daughters, the Lady D daughters, with like a giant hammer. So if you want a little bit of euphoria, a little bit of fun, I would fully recommend it. Just beat all the stages with the S rank in order to get all the characters. That's how you unlock them. So now it's Austin's turn.
Yeah, pretty much everything that Ren said is pretty much true. I played a lot of Chris. I thought he was out of all the additional characters, I think he was the most fun to play, just because you could just sucker punch nearly every creature in the game. You can make a build around just punching things and only shooting when you need to, and you just become just a brawler. You just become like a street brawler, just boom, 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 boom. And you can just level up your punches enough to where you'll like instantly kill everything with one punch. And it's really fun. Heisenberg and Lady D, their gimmicks are weird, but they're still fun. It's a little bit harder to make a build off of something because all their abilities work well with each other. Where Chris is like, you can just do punches only and you'll be fine. With Lady D and Heisenberg, you kind of need to mix up and match your skills and your abilities to have it be successful in getting like high scores and such and dealing with certain enemies. But overall, yeah, the additional orders is really fun. It definitely beats freaking playing Ethan, who has bare bone stuff, and then when you play Madhouse or Night Village of Nightmares or whatever it is, like the harder version of the levels where he only has a grenade launcher and something else, and you're just like, how do you even play these levels with these weapons? So thankfully, you have Chris with his Dragoon and his pistol, which are both really good guns with super powerful up close abilities, and you can just increase your speed. Yeah, it's very lame to buy all of his stuff back and just, the other characters completely blow Ethan. Like Ethan, you get to sit in the corner, let Chris and the freaking bad dogs of the house do this. It's ridiculously fun, even though I wish they would have added more to Ethan. Like maybe he had some like mold powers, something to give him a little bit more extra oomph to where you can replay him more and just have him. It's just a lot easier time because playing those harder levels as Ethan, you need to look at a walkthrough or a guide to get like the best rank. But yeah, honestly, the additional orders makes Mercs really fun, and people should play it if you have the DLC.
Yep, that's what I would say. I would suggest it. It's a fun time. Just as I said before, I was also confused on how to unlock everybody, but once again, if you get an S rank on each stage, then I think you just get everybody. So that's how. Because at first I had Chris only. I'm like, where the fuck is the other two characters? And then I was like, oh, okay, I have to do all of this with the S rank, and then I get everybody. But it's totally worth it. I would say it's a lot better than the original Mercs where Ethan only has a handgun in hard mode and that's it. So yeah, we're going to now move on to the next question, and that's basically the other update that they had in this, which was the third person campaign being implemented in Resident Evil Village. So has anyone had any hands-on time with this? We'll start off with, once again, Mr. Austin.
Alrighty. Honestly, I have not gotten a chance to play third person, so there's not much I can say. I've seen people play it and I've seen aspects of it and it looks cool. I know some animations don't look right. Like I know they had to redo a lot of animations with the camera movements to make it look fluid. But there's some things that I know that don't look right. But all in all, it's an okay change of perspective and it's worth the playthrough. I wouldn't say play it on fucking the Village of Nightmares, whatever the hardest difficulty, but it's definitely worth a shout, I would say, on just personal viewing.
Okay, fair enough. If you haven't played it, then we could just skip and go to the next person. Shadow, what about you?
While I've not physically played it myself, I do have several observations of people that have seen it. I think it's very telling from a lot of people I've spoken to who have that it definitely changes how you interpret the game in regards to kind of how scary you find some things. Obviously, they talk about a lot of the animation reworks, but definitely from sort of what I've seen as well, the game doesn't feel anywhere near quite as intimidating, I don't think, just because you have this over the shoulder and you have kind of like, you feel you've got this better field of view. A lot of enemies, like when you're taking on like the obviously like the werewolves, for example, they don't feel and they don't seem like anywhere near as kind of intimidating as like in first person when you're physically there and they're like right in front of you. Which I think is kind of telling, and I think it gives you an idea of kind of how like the series as a whole has changed a bit as well. You think back to Resident Evil 7, for example. You think to like Jack Baker, who I still think was one of my favorite characters of the entire series. Obviously, he's a raving lunatic and he's completely insane, and that's great. But I think one of the other reasons that he's kind of very memorable for being scary is because it's like the first time you've been in this first-person view. So, and you're kind of witnessing it almost like as yourself. So it's one of the first things you see doing that as well. So I think it goes to show like the difference. Just taking the camera out of the player from first to third person has this really big impact on how a lot of the rest of the game ends up getting interpreted. And I think Village is a good demonstration of that. I think from what I've seen, the third player seems fine. It's a different way to experience it, but it's clearly a different flavor from doing it how it was meant to have been originally.
Okay, so I'm gonna give my experience because I did play it for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And I have a couple of opinions on it. Like, first and foremost, I do realize that some of the animations are weird, and that's due to the rework. The way Ethan holds the karma bit knife or whatever, the one that sort of curves like Sam Fisher's knife, that animation with both his hands like spread out, that was a bit weird looking to see. But overall, after having hands on with it, I kind of agree with Shadow in the sense that because the depth of field is a bit more fixed and wider, it's not that same sort of intimate up close. Here's a couple of werewolves out of your vision that could completely just hunt you down and try to knock you out of sight. There's none of that going on. It feels something equivalent to like playing an RE2 remake skin on top of Resident Evil Village. Like, once you play it, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. And sometimes it can look goofy for worse in terms of animations, and sometimes it could feel a lot better in terms of how it was. I would think it's in that okay median ground where this is nice, this is sufficient, it works, but there is some problems with it, like once again some of the tension just not migrating over too well, some of the animations just looking a little bit funny, like the one I mentioned. And there's also the bit of just simply saying that, of course, it's one of those things where it's just like, it's a nice quality of life touch, and that's about it. It won't do anything to like change your mind vastly on how the game is. And I heard some speedrunners also say that it might be a little bit for worse, because apparently some stuff with the shotgun, some strats you can't do anymore. But I feel like that's par for the course for any sort of camera change or update massively to a game where they do things that you couldn't do originally anymore for speed running, where it's like, oh, now it's different, I got to figure out something else. So that's to be expected as well when you really think about it. But it's okay. It's not the it could have been worse, definitely. I'm positive that if you go back and you look at the original modded third-person cameras for Resident Evil Village that the fans made, it's probably a lot more janky than this. So at least Capcom had the forethought to fix some things, so I can't really fault them too much. Yeah, I would say check it out whenever you get a chance. Just load up like a New Game Plus save and then go through it third person. It's gonna feel a little bit weird, but you'll get used to it over time. So has anyone else played third person for the most part?
I have.
Go ahead. Give your opinion on it.
All right, so it honestly, for me, I kind of felt like it was disappointing. Like, I knew going in they weren't going to rework any of the cutscenes to reflect it, but it's really jarring to me just playing in third person, then it just zooming in through the back of your head to do the first person cutscene like normal. That was actually one of the things that kind of turned me off about Deus Ex, the one on the PlayStation 3 originally, because half the time it's in first person and the other half it's in third. I feel like this should have been like a free update to it rather than a part of a paid DLC thing. It kind of seems like it was a little half baked in my opinion, but like I know they're not going to rework all the cutscenes in third person for that, but it's still kind of disappointing that it feels a little jank in my opinion.
Yeah.
But, I mean, actually playing through it is great. I mean, I do like the perspective of it. I don't feel like it meshes with the actual game and how it was built. Shadows of Rose, on the other hand, plays great in third person, but the base game just doesn't.
Yeah, it's like I said, I think it's okay, but it's just one of those things where, of course, it's not going to be made for first person because they put in a new perspective. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I feel like the opposite with stuff like Evil Within 2, where it's like is made for third person, but they implemented first person, and I don't, it's kind of gimmicky in a sense, but it's just something where it's, if you prefer it, you prefer it. I'm not gonna say that I think one or the other is superior, because I've seen people get in those debates where it's like, oh well, I'm glad they finally put it in third person, because there's people that really don't care about first. It's like, that's understandable, but then there's people that's like, they would pass it off as a bad game if it didn't have it, and I'm just like, I think Village was just fine for what it is. I could see if someone has something like motion sickness and they say, I just couldn't play the original game because I felt this sort of way, and I could not touch it. Now it's like, it's a little bit more refined to maybe those people if they want to pick it up and try it, but it's definitely some animation woes, and it's definitely weirdness going on when you go from first to third. But overall, nice attempt. I had a previous question where I said I don't know if they're going to implement first or third for RE9. I would figure maybe this is the test bed experiment to do something like this. But I had another question that's a little bit more interesting. I was going to write in a doc, but I didn't have any time, so I'm going to answer it here and say here. So for RE9, who do you think should be the villain for that game in terms of the unused characters that they had or people they were building up, or should they go with someone new? Austin, I want you to go first.
You said so. A villain they would use for RE9.
Who should be the villain in your opinion?
Who should be the villain? That's a really big one, because RE9, because supposedly it's going to be the final one, so, and it's going to mostly probably tackle Chris going after the corruption in BSAA, which I completely would want to, because it's hard to tell who is the head of BSAA and the certain divisions, because there's the North American one and there's a European one, if I remember correctly. It's like two different factions in one. I could be wrong about that. I could be right. I'm not sure. So if you had to make a villain, who would it be? Well, you might say it might be one of the BSAA guys, which is quite possibly true because of just how Village ended. If they're going to do a villain, though, I would say they might have to do maybe one or two villains or antagonists to follow. There might be one with the connections and one with the corruption in BSA, or it could just be one entirely. I do not know. But yeah, it's hard to say who would be a villain. I would say it's going to be like a stereotype, like, oh, it's going to be one of the BSAA, and then there's going to be connection guy. That's what I think. But if they want to surprise me, they can surprise me. I hope they do. But yeah, that's what I really have to say about that.
Shadow, it's your turn on this question.
Albert Wesker.
Oh man.
Now I say that to see what the response is. It's not the most absurd thing, is it? Like, you could believe that they find a way to root him back into the series. You know, he's still like one of the most notable, recognizable, and popular characters still in the series. You know, it's from all the sort of crossovers and bits and pieces that are going on. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think they're going to do that. I think it's going to be someone original. But I think if they can think of a reasonably way-ish to kind of cram it in and have him be involved in some form or another, I would not be shocked at all. This is Capcom. And this, again, goes into what I think ultimately RE9 is going to be. It's going to be the series coming complete full circle. And it's going to be bringing in a lot of references from the past, lots of story beats kind of being tied in. I still 100% believe that this could and should be Chris and Jill's sign off from the series, done with the main story. They can always turn up maybe if you carry on beyond that. But I think for the most part of a lot of the stories and a lot of what's been going on Resident Evil, I think this should be the end point for that. And if you want to do stuff beyond Resident Evil 9, go for it. But I think this is the perfect chance to kind of draw a line in the sand and say, right, this is kind of over now. Because the series has been kind of rolling ongoing for like 25 years or so, at least. And it's been, a lot has happened in that time. And you've got a lot of characters that are still hanging around from the very start. And it's like, eventually you have to find closure for them. So But yeah, I think it'll be someone probably new, or at least it'll start with someone new. It'll be, you know, some higher up corporate sort of in the whether it be sort of similar to like Resident Evil 6 they had with what's his face, you know, the guy, you know, the guy, I can't think of his name. Fill it in for me, please, when you get there. I should remember this. I only played the game like last month. But if I had to go for a Simmons, that's the one. Thank you. But if I had to go for a slightly right field pick, Albert Wesker, and I wouldn't even say it's that ridiculous a name to throw out.
Okay, Dev, how do you feel about all these implications being brought up? What is your opinion on this?
On who the last villain should, or what should happen in Resident Evil 9 and who the last villain should be?
Yep.
I would say, no, this is just going to be me playing around, but I think it should be Wesker. But it's not the Wesker we're talking about, like what we just talked about. I'm talking about like Alex Wesker. I don't know if you guys know or remember her from Resident Evil Revelations 2. You know, I mean, that storyline, I mean, that one also ended in the cliffhanger, right? I mean, what's going on? I mean, in that game, she pretty much or confirmed that she's taking over the mind or body of Natalia. So, and that was it. So like, and remember, like, yeah, that event kind of coincided with the timeline of Resident Evil 6. So it's kind of like, all right, so what's going on now, you know? But besides that, yes, on a serious note, actually, okay, I would say I agree. I think that they should sign off Chris. I don't know about Jill though, because we haven't seen her in a while too. But yeah, I mean, some of these characters are getting kind of old. I mean, but if they're fan favorites, I guess, I mean, they could stay. But I mean, I could see them like ending certain main characters. But at this point in the Resident Evil series, I mean, yes, the whole franchise has been going on for the greater part of the last 2 decades. And from what Capcom is seeing, I mean, there's a huge demand for it, and I could still see it continuing on for a much longer time, actually. So they will find new ways to implement current characters and probably go, you know, make new characters and kind of like, there's a new virus in town, like we got to go deal with it, and probably there's going to be a Wesker number 2, you know, I mean, doing the whole Neo Matrix kind of maneuvers. I mean, we just don't know. But that's pretty much all I got to say. I mean, it's just really hard to predict right now. But one thing's for certain: as long as the demand for Resident Evil's there, and Capcom seeing that their revenue is like, okay, well, like a lot of people are like love this game, love this franchise, they're gonna still continue to, you know, pump out more and more in the future.
Oh, okay. So it's time for my wild bird brain theories. Who I will want as a villain now. I like all the Wesker stuff. They have a way to technically do it. I mean, people were making this theory like during RE6, but when they had the C virus, it wasn't like just the exact same person, but again, they did mold someone to be in the vein of Ada Wong in a sense, and that was Carla before she went absolutely crazy from that experiment. So they tried to copy someone in this series, and they were successful in doing it with the C virus. So I mean, that could be Ada wrong. that could be one way that they could try to shoehorn that in. I know from the reaction that I've seen when that idea was first presented, people said, hey, it's dumb, it's over the top. But when hasn't already been like dumb, over the top? And Wesker came back after being stabbed in the chest. So I mean, it could be plausible in a sense if they want to bring in that ultimate like sort of fan fiction. They could just do that, and that would appease a lot of people. I mean, in DMC5, you know, they brought back Virgil, so I don't see why they wouldn't do something like that. You know, Capcom has done it several times. That being said, Alex Wesker is the main one. She has a lingering story thread present from Resident Evil Revelations 2, and they never really resolved that. They mostly said, hey, now there's the implication that Alex Wesker digitally imprinted her mind into this child, and she potentially could be immortal. So we've never had like RE protagonist dealing with someone that's like can't be killed or can't die or any premise like that. So I'm wondering how would that go, because most of the bosses have been cannon fodder for the most part. So this is like something different if they decide to introduce that element. So that would be cool. And I said before, that could be a foil to Rose as well if they want to introduce her as an NPC or something like that, because she has someone that cannot die. As for the rest, they obviously have to make this grand in scale. Again, Capcom has said before that it's two things. I'm not sure if I brought this up already, but it was mentioned that they feel like Resident Evil is getting to a point where it's very difficult to keep up with the timeline. So if this is the last like RE in the mainline timeline, I can totally see it from that statement alone, because they are saying, hey, this is a little bit too tough for us to keep up with. So that would correlate to the other rumor where it's like this is taking very long to develop for, which I can see it honestly, because it's a lot of stories to clear up. But like I said earlier, they introduced the 16-year time jump, and people mentioned wanting Jill back and stuff like that. So this is my wild take. I don't think they should wrap up the 16-year time jump in this game. I feel like you have plenty of years in the past prior to that time jump that you could fill in stories, you could fill in the blanks, you could put in like a Revelations 3. What was a younger Jill doing in this time period after all of the events of RE6 and all that stuff happened, you know what I mean? It's a lot of room for experimentation with the timeline. And then there's another thing they mentioned where it's like they want to make Resident Evil into an anthology series where it's a series of isolated events after RE9. The article does exist and it is out there, but if that's the case, then what I believe is, for story purposes, this might be the end for the older characters, and then for the anthology games, they could simply make like newer games or games that took place in the past beforehand, and still fill in the blanks with like different characters that people didn't see before, or newer characters if they want to have that isolation, you know what I mean? Those standalone stories, they could do that, and that would be a perfect way for RE to continue without having to compromise anything that occurred in RE9. So I think that's the perfect way to do it. It's like Deva said, this series makes money. It's been one of the most popular and profitable survival horror franchises on Earth, and that's not without a reason. So all the setup is there, all the cookies are on the table. It's just up to them to perform, and that's what I feel about that. So next up is Deadman.
So honestly, I was Black Shadow kind of ruined it. I was gonna say Wesker to be a smartass.
Sorry about that. But it's not
okay.
ridiculous answers. The thing, it's not ridiculous.
It's not, and honestly, with them saying that 9 is like supposed to be the big finale of it, really, who else but Wesker could really be the main big bad to end it all? And honestly, I've never been fully convinced that Wesker is dead, just because of his propensity to not die. So I'm just imagining, Chris and Jill, some kind of storyline with them in 9, them busting into the office of the BSAA, and then you have a slow chair turn around, and it's Wesker with his half-melted face, and just being like, "Hello, Chris." Just something ridiculous like that. But beyond Wesker and like kind of Simmons to a lesser extent, I don't really know who could be the next big bad, and it would be satisfying, because I mean, Miranda's dead, but Miranda's still a relatively new character, so it wouldn't really feel good for her to be the big bad that was masterminding everything from, all time. And I doubt that Spencer would even be a good answer either, because, he's been dead for some time, and, he's not had a huge presence in especially the later games. So outside of the smartass answer being Wesker, I don't really know who would be a good, satisfying villain.
Zamzara, what about you? How do you feel about this question?
um, so I haven't thought a lot about who the villain could be, but all this talk of Wesker, I think Wesker would be great to bring back. I would like to see them come up with an original villain, whether it's somebody corrupt in the BSAA or somebody else, some sort of corporate figure. But I'd like to see the first like little bit of the game, you know, less than the first maybe chapter or two, depending on how they break it up. I would like to see that to be from Chris's perspective, and you're going after this big bad, whatever, and you capture him. You know, Chris finishes the mission, but somehow it's revealed that Wesker is behind it all, and Wesker shows up, kills Chris, and then you flip to Jill and Claire. You know, you could do another little time jump, 6 months, 3 months, what have you, where, you know, Jill and Claire meet up to try and figure out what happened to Chris. You know, Jill was Chris's first partner, Claire is his sister. That's a common thread. We've never seen Jill and Claire on a mission together, so I would like to see them go on a mission, you know, try and avenge Chris's death, try and kill Wesker once and for all. You could tie Rose into that. You know, Rose was doing missions for them, you know, and maybe she defects somehow, or maybe she's the catalyst for Chris trying to stop this corporate a machine that's running and creating these BOWs. But that's what I would like to see. I would like to see something like that. Something really dramatic happens to Chris right in the beginning of RE9, kicks off an adventure with Jill and Claire, trying to avenge or figure out what happened to Chris. And, you know, that ends his story on a high note. He dies what he loves doing. That's all he's ever done is try to stop them. Maybe he doesn't succeed, but that sets up some good stakes for a final game. You know, you're finally going after Wesker, who has, you know, maybe in the shadows after 5, like we've said, you know, maybe he's not really dead. Maybe he's really been pulling the strings behind the scenes through all these games. And the whole idea with you know, them having trouble keeping track of this lore, I don't buy that entirely, because like Kingdom Hearts exists, Final Fantasy exists, these games with these massive like lore behind them that somebody has to keep track of. I mean, shit, even comic books exist. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't necessarily buy that. Just say that you're done with these characters and you want to move on. Like, you don't need to feed us some line of bullshit about how difficult Resident Evil is to keep track of, because it's ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, Resident Evil isn't that difficult to keep track of compared to some of the other fandoms and games out there. So I don't buy that line. But yeah, ultimately I'd like to see Wesker as a villain, Chris gets sent off in some blaze of glory trying to stop it, and then an adventure with Jill and Claire trying to figure things out as a final cap to that 1 through 9, or I guess 0 through 9 story.
Yep, and to give extra context to that line that they said, I don't know how true it is, but apparently this was taken off of a live stream where one of the producers for Resident Evil 2 Remake apparently took some notes from Wikipedia, and people were saying, oh, they really can't keep up with their storylines, blah, blah, blah. But it's as you said, you know, RE is very simple, even at its most confusing, which I would say is RE6, because they had like 4 different storylines going on. You still could understand each and every single one of them, even though towns were bombed because someone was horny. But that's something we already talked about in the Resident Evil 6 podcast, so I'll leave it at that. Yeah, I'm gonna like now open the floor to a slight open talk. If anything, if anyone wants to bring up anything that we haven't mentioned, or they want to chime in on stuff, they can now unmute. But overall, I do think this was fun. This was entertaining. So, open talk section. Hello.
Okay then. Hello. Yeah, I know, because I was just going through all like our chat and stuff, and it's just been funny. But I had a really, I had a bit of a meme circulating in my head. It's like the final villain of Resident Evil 9, who would it be? It's like, what if it's Rebecca Chambers? You know, after all the vendetta bullshit she went through,
Oh God.
she's like, you know what,
Next
Chris?
people will be saying
screw
Billy
this."
Cohen's coming back, for the love of God.
Oh, jeez.
Oh man.
But that's just just a meme. I was just circling my head. That'll just blow your guys' mind. Oh, how about Rebecca Chambers be the final villain? You know, that would be a twist. You know, after Vendetta, she's so fucked up about almost being in this like weird marriage shit.
Honestly, after this game, I don't know what direction they are going with the remakes, and since this is open talk, we're pretty much done with the village discussion. So, I don't know where they're going there or with some of these older characters, because they were gonna have Billy and at some point in Infinite Darkness, and then they're like, no, this doesn't make sense. Why would he go back to the war?
Yeah.
And whatever it was, Pananstam. Yeah, it's like I can see why they cut that. I know people were disappointed, but it made sense.
Yeah, like
I
there's
mean-
more medias to talk about.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think what they're gonna do is like they're gonna continue remaking, like kind of going backwards in a way. Probably remaking the remake of 1 already, and I could see them doing 0 and eventually Code Veronica, and then creep their way to 5 and 6 to kind of like give another canon or version of the whole timeline of Resident Evil. So it finally connects to 7, right? You know what I mean? So it's kind of like that could be the main, point right now that they're going to be doing. But just to end it though, I mean, I don't know, man. Like, what can they do? I mean, yeah, you guys mentioned like Billy, but I mean, that doesn't really make sense that they would bring him back. I mean, isn't he supposed to be in hiding because he's still a wanted person, right? Isn't he?
Yeah.
Or no, he wasn't. I'm sorry. No. Actually, no. Scratch that. Sorry. I remember a document that Rebecca said that he died. Supposedly died. I like remember like that document from the Star's office that we find.
Yeah, he is KIA, but
Yeah.
still alive to us. So, unless he's like super off the grid because he has to be working somewhere under a new identity, then it's gonna be weird to have him paired up with BSA people, unless the only way I could buy something like that is if the world is in dire straits. Like at this point, all bets are off. Alliances have to be formed because the planet is too messed up. And honestly, I don't get that from the future timeline. Everything seems peaceful. Like life is normal now from what I've seen in the background. So nothing's going too chaotic.
Wait, real quick. Let me interrupt you here real quick.
Mhm.
What if? Okay, this is what if. You know that ending we just talked about with the whole Shadow of Rose, right? And the ending of RE Village, right?
Yeah.
You know how Rose was like, inside that car with that one agent, and she supposedly saw that her dad. Well, why did she see her dad, right? Well, what if she's still inside the Megamycete,
That would be a nice plot twist.
right? Like, I mean,
I
it kind of like, all right, well, I mean, it just that'd be like, okay, that'd be interesting. And now the plot is like, okay, now Chris has to go save Rose somehow to get her mind out of the Megamycete somehow, right? And then so now he has to delve into the Megamycete some like in some capacity with like some type of machine that, similar to Alex Wesker, where she was able to go through whatever transplant her consciousness to another thing. Well, Chris could use the same technology, do the same thing, but what if they do like this Avengers thing where they'll get Jill, Leon, and all the main characters, and in the end they're gonna have like this end game, where it's like Chris pops out from this portal, and and then you see all these characters just start coming out in flood, and like you see, I'm just going off, I'm just stupid. I'm just they're gonna have an ending.
that was enjoyable though. That was
Mother Miranda's plan all along, was to do that. So that would be a hell of a plot twist that, wouldn't even be like this just came out of nowhere bullshit. Like, it would actually kind of make sense.
Well, I mean, who would be the Thanos though? I mean, like, are they gonna have like on one side all the Resident Evil characters on one side, and then the other you see like a revived Albert Wesker with a like Matrix like trench coat, and then he's running towards Chris and whatnot, you know? And like, what are we gonna see that like, or like I don't know, what are we gonna have here?
You know,
And what? And Chris gets Mjolnir and says, "Avengers assemble."
you know,
I mean, it's stupid enough I wouldn't hate it. It would be like, you know what? This is fine. This is funny.
Gosh. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh man, that would be crazy. I mean, look, we have so many characters in the Resident Evil series. I mean, like, it wouldn't be out of the realm to have one, like a whole bunch of people on one side and then the other just a bunch of villains and whatnot. I mean, jeez.
I mean, technically, we have Jake and Sheva in like the same regional area. That'd be
I
a
would
game.
love to see more of Sheva. It's criminal that she's only been in 5.
Oh yeah.
I agree with
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, fucking Resident Evil 4 remakes, Hunnigan looks like Sheva.
She does. She does.
Kind of,
Which is a little,
Yeah.
which is a little jarring to me. Now that I think about it, I was like, she kind of looks like Sheva, like the exact same hairstyle, just with glasses, and just everything else. It just looks like Sheva.
You know,
It's
if
like
they
her
pull
business-
out the
it's honestly,
Hunnigan
it's
was
like
actually
her-
Sheva's sister the whole time, I would not be upset.
I mean, her name's Ingrid Hunnigan,
Yeah.
Sheva Elamar.
No, so
But
I just want to say something like real quick. There is one experiment that I kind of wanted them to sort of do, and I'm kind of curious if this is possible. So they say that Natalia now is possibly immortal, Natalia Alex or whatever. So there's that on the table. I was wondering with the way Wesker's old virus worked, I was always wondering, could she combo that immortality into also having powers if she has perfect DNA to handle any of the prototype T virus on the market? Because, I mean, she is smart enough to probably manufacture that. She is a virologist. So I was thinking they could do that, and then she would be, you know, a big villain and a big threat, because she has like 2 things going on at the same time. That'd be absolutely ridiculous. But we just don't know.
I mean, it just I mean, you might as well add in like she found, like, you know, plays around with the mold. I mean, if we're working with immortality, I mean, Mother Miranda pretty much figured that out.
Yep.
If you think about it, how old was she, like, right? Like by Resident Evil Village. I mean, she was born sometime before the 1900s.
Right?
It's 1900s, because like she had her daughter
is it?
during the like her daughter was like 10 years old during the Spanish flu, and that happened like in 1918. So now, like, okay, so immortality aside, like Ren said, I mean, okay, so she has the mind of Alex, right? We're talking about Natalia Corda, but let's just say Alex Wesker. She has the mind of Alex Wesker, but you know, giving her the viruses that Wesker put himself. Remember, he was a special case. He was able to develop antibodies out of all the Wesker children, out of all of them, right? There was a ton of them. He was the only one who really was able to adapt to it, and that's why we saw the way he was in Resident Evil 5. But let's say if she is able to adapt to it like Albert Wesker, now add in more like the mold on top of that, and which adds in more of the hallucinations, all the supernatural. I mean, we're making a super villain. Like,
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
status
yeah.
kind of character. You know what I mean? Like, you might as well just put this in space. You know what I mean? Resident Evil in space. You know, like, I don't know. Gosh, these little memes are getting me off, man. I can't look at the dancing. I'm sorry, man. Like, but besides that, I mean, I don't know, man. Is you know what, that pretty much summarizes it. Like, it will get to the point where Resident Evil is gonna get so outlandish, so, I don't know, out of whack, that we end up seeing like what we saw in the like Netflix series of like, who was this, like Evelyn, that's what her name was, right? I didn't watch it, but I knew of it, like dancing in front of our main character, and I think that's what, Jill, right?
Oh man, I just decided to skip that show.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, people showed me little clips of it, and when I saw that dancing, I was like, is this even Resident Evil anymore? I mean, how did we get this far? You know what I mean? It was going in a great direction. I mean, it still is. Actually, the series is still like the main game, but just the outside of it, like the live action, like, who who signed off on this? Did they even play Resident Evil? Like, I don't understand this. You know what I mean? Like, and this, I'm sorry, I'm going on a rant here, but like, I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. I've been playing it since I was 8 years old, man. Like in the PS1 days, and to see what it has devolved to seeing this character in right, that's her name, whatever. What's her name? Evelyn, right? Or whoever this is dancing. Like, why? Just why? Like, the source material is literally right in front of them, right? I don't understand why they have to meld it in different ways to like do this. Like, why? What is wrong with these people? You know what I mean? It's just like, okay, all right, guys, we got the great source material right here, but you know what? You know what we're gonna do? We're not gonna use any of that. Maybe we'll just use little nitpicks here and there, but we're gonna make something completely different, and we're gonna have this random lady dance in front of our character and put it and say it's Resident Evil. Like, who thought that was a great idea? Seriously, what's wrong with these people?
I have no faith for RE live action. I think that died when Apocalypse came out and Nemesis had like a heart. You know what I mean? 10 times the size of his head. So I was just like, I think there's no faith until someone, and there's been pretty good fan content for the most part for like fan movies, but I have no faith in these anymore, to be honest.
Well, the thing is,
I will say for like the first 3, maybe just the 2 W.S. Anderson movies, those were like so campily stupid. They were great. The later ones definitely draw. I still haven't ever finished the last movie because I'm just like, I can't get through it. But like, I still haven't watched the TV series yet, but I remember thinking when they announced it, I was like, you know what? Out of everybody, Lance Reddick probably would make the best Wesker. And from what I heard, he was the best part of the show.
Oh, jeez.
So, like, I mean, if they could get their casting right and actually do the source material justice, I mean, they've got a damn good series on their hands, but they just keep screwing things up.
You know, and the crazy thing is, like, you going back to the Anderson, like, your films and all that. I mean, they did. I would obviously the first 2, like you said, I would say felt the most Resident Evil out of, you know, I'm talking about live action, but again, the source material was right there. They literally just nitpicked like maybe certain names. Like, for example, I think it was the second one, right? Remember when Nemesis just got his Gatling gun or you know, rocket launcher, and they show like the Stars team, and they're like, you know, some like the Hunnigan or whatever in the background says like, that's like Elite Stars team, they're the best. And next thing you know, they're blowing up. I'm like, how are they the best? Like, you just ruined it. Like, what is wrong with these people? Like, I don't understand, like, why they have to ruin something so good, right?
Well, I mean, to be fair, you can be elite all you want, and you still get your ass blown up by a rocket launcher and a Gatling gun.
But they're like, but that's a Stars team. They're the best. Like, well, there's no point of saying that. You just use them as fodder. I mean, so much for being elite. Like, I mean
now had Nemesis gone like hand to hand with them and beat their ass, I mean, I could understand that being a thing, but like, there's nothing you can do against a rocket launcher.
Well, I mean, at least do him justice. Maybe, okay, like, let's say he does like shoot a rocket launcher. I mean, let's have them at least half of them like dodge and be like, all right, guys, like, we can still fight Nemesis, and some of them go after Nemesis and show their hand-to-hand combat. No, that's it. Forget these guys, you know what I mean? Like, you know, they're the best, and then boom, that's it. You know, like, please, like.
So before, I'm sorry to interrupt, but before the rant continues, because I don't want Shadow to forget his point. He has something to say, real quick.
I'm sorry.
This is going a bit back in the conversation. But I don't want to throw out a mention to Ben Croshaw over on Escapist. He did a video a few months ago. It was more focusing on Resident Evil 4 remake, but talking a lot about kind of like the cycles of Resident Evil that have originated over the course of time, and kind of how they kind of gone from this period of like, you know, they'd have like a sort of a freshish sort of slate, you know, with like Resident Evil 4 is a great example of like they kind of took what they had originally, kind of largely chucked it in like the filing drawer and started afresh with 4, had a great game. And then they kind of went to build from that, and it kind of diluted itself. And arguably, I would say the same happened with Resident Evil 7. The reason I bring it up is just talking about the whole like what RE9 should be and what should probably happen beyond RE9. And it's weird for me to say because I've been playing Resident Evil games for like 20 years, but I'm starting to get to a point where I'm not sure like I'm as heavily invested in Resident Evil as a series as I used to be because there's just so much of it now, and there has been so much of it, and there's been some really really great games of it, and there's been a lot of stuff I've really enjoyed, some great moments in that, but I do feel like Resident Evil at the moment is kind of spinning its wheels. I don't know if that's a point that's shared by anyone at all.
So you have
Like,
some of that RE fatigue?
a little bit. There is a bit of fatigue about it. I mean, it's a shame because the winter storyline I've enjoyed as a whole. I think it's been pretty good. But it's just like I feel like direction at the moment. It's like I don't really see where it is. I guess you could argue at the moment it's been just trying to focus on like tying up some loose ends, which is fine. And it's also because of the fact it's been 18 months since Resident Evil Village came out, and then basically everything went dead. And the next thing they're doing is a remake, which isn't really going to add anything particularly new. And it's difficult as well because like the remake of RE2 was fantastic. I still think the remake of 3 was fine, and the remake for 4 should be pretty good. But I just feel like as far as like a more sort of creative sort of standpoint with the new stuff going on, I do get the impression that they're just kind of, I think they're struggling. I think they're really struggling with so much stuff that's already happened that they've got to link back to. I think they're struggling to really know what to do with it. So maybe the best thing to do is to just kind of cut it loose. I don't necessarily mean like, Resident Evil 9 happens and that's it. You end the series because it's still a very notable name. But I am starting to get to believe that maybe RE9 needs to happen. They use it as a chance to kind of, put a lot of resolution in and put a lot of things to bed, and then just move on from it. Which is a difficult and a bold thing to do, and I don't necessarily think that's something they'd want to do because there's a lot of noble names. But I don't really. I mean, what is next?
I'm of two minds with this before I pass the baton to anyone who wants to speak on this. But mine, like the left side of my mind is like, yes, this has gone on for a very very long time, and I agree that Capcom really needs to take the opportunity to focus on other franchises horror related, because there's people asking, where's Dino Crisis? Are you going to bring back Haunting Ground? Are you going to do anything with those psychological elements you introduce in Village and make a full game? So
Outbreak remake.
Yeah, what about an Outbreak remake or something like that? So there are those questions of differing thoughts on what people want. But the other side of my brain is like, I don't mind. I think I have fatigue set in when the games are bad. And the worst examples of when I had this RE fatigue was when it was near 2012, I believe, where they released RE6 and ORC, and all those games came out, and they had mixed results with what they tried to experiment with. So I would prefer at least for the games to have some quality standard as it has now, as opposed to the past where they were just putting things on Resident Evil and it wasn't even feeling like Resident Evil, and that's when the fatigue set in for me in the past.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that period, because you think like in 2012, Revelations came out, Resident Evil 6 came out, Operation Raccoon City came out, Mercenaries 3D had just come out. There was a lot of Resident Evil at that point, and that's why there was nothing for the next 2 years. Like, it was completely silent. Then Revelations 2 came out afterwards, and it kind of ticked along, and then we eventually got RE7 like in 2017. But it's like, again, at the moment, like, we've got a lot of Resident Evil. Like, we've had a Resident Evil game in pretty much every single year. We haven't had very much in 2022, but I'm concerned the series is spinning its wheels a bit at the moment, and it's not good for it at all.
Yeah, I think they should correlate back to their last statement of, hey, we're gonna remake other games or other franchises and give them reimaginings, quote unquote. So why not try to take that sort of step there and see what you could do? Because I talked to Ninja a lot in the horror server, and he keeps saying that he doesn't believe Capcom likes to experiment because why bend your marquee survival horror franchise into the ground when it's making a lot of money going back to Dino Crisis, where it's like you don't know what the result will be. And I kind of see that logic because it's like it's a lot less risky doing a Resident Evil game versus like a Dino Crisis reboot or remake or whatever, and you don't know what it's going to be. But like I said, the fan demand is there, so it's not worth without like trying.
Yeah, the one other thing I've got as well is that I'm not even that sure that throwing the name Resident Evil onto these games is really adding that much value to them anymore as well. Like if you took Resident Evil 7 or you took Resident Evil 4, for example, and you didn't call them Resident Evil and you called them something like completely new and it was the exact same game, doesn't make them a bad game anymore. They're still really, really good titles, and they'd still be fantastic to play. And that's my other concern as well. The remakes is fine, but it's like I don't think like it's not like throwing Resident Evil onto the title. I don't necessarily means as much now as it may have done, like say 10, 15 years ago, where I think it had a bit more gravitas because there's just been so much of it. So maybe it's just a point like they can do the remake, they can do RE9 say in 2024 whatever else, but maybe just give it a chill, let it have some time, take a break, do other stuff. You don't have to abandon it entirely, but I think that's kind of where we're at here. We're getting to this point where there's a lot of churn, and I don't see how it's particularly beneficial. It's a route you can just keep going down. It's a rabbit hole you can keep exploring, and there's only one real result of that is you have a repeat of 2012 where there's just so much of it oversaturates, and then it kind of loses
complete global saturation.
I knew someone was going to make that reference once I said it. I regret using that verbiage, unfortunately, but it was.
I've been holding back laughter for all the memes I've been posting.
But the point stands. I think that's why I think RE9 needs to be just this. This point where it's just it finishes to some extent, not necessarily entirely, but I think it needs to be like a closure, and I think it needs a lot of closure. I think Resident Evil as a whole needs a lot of closure after 25 years, because you've just kind of got this point where you've got it's another infection in another place. Seville variants of a theme, and you'd think after all of these virus outbreaks that someone in some important position would say, what, we need to fucking stop this. Not BSA, but you think the world would be like, okay, we've had all these horrendous outbreaks in America and China and Africa and that sort of thing. Maybe we really ought to do something to stop this. And no one seems to care. They're just like, it's fine. We'll just let another million people die to this outbreak in a year. So it won't happen to me.
The only issue with that is that that's sort of the plot that they created for themselves. Like they haven't
making 100%.
They haven't gone after like the black market or anything, constantly reproducing these viruses and selling them when it's like the question is there and it's obvious, but they just don't. So I don't know why. Maybe it's way too fast that we anticipate. Maybe there is a reason after they created that from RE5. I just don't know. But like I said, I'm of two minds where I agree they should do other survival horror content, and they have the IPs to do it, and people have that demand for Dino Crisis. But the other mind is like, it's not bad unless it is bad. Like I rather would get a slew of games that's good versus a slew that's bad and mixed reception, just like it was with ORC, where I really did not like my first playthrough of that game. So it's something to that effect for me. But what does everyone else think of that conversation?
I mean, kind of, I agree definitely that there is a bit too much, and you can say that for honestly a lot of franchises. Like, sure, Operation Raccoon City was bad, but was it bad because it was bad, or was it bad because it had the Resident Evil title on it? Because I didn't enjoy Operation Raccoon City all that much, but I can't deny that at its core it wasn't a terrible game. It just, with the things that it presented and the just kind of, I seem to remember it being kind of jank, which granted I haven't played it since
it came out. It is. It feels still.
It's pretty jank still.
Still jank.
It's stiff.
Yeah, knife combos are still broken as shit.
Oh my God.
I think the problem is it is kind of emblematic of where Resident Evil was at that point. I think that's what that's its legacy. Whether it's fair or not is a different matter entirely. And RE6 gets some stick for being this completely giant, expansive, sprawling narrative across all these different things, which was difficult to make sense of. But I think Raccoon City is a much more kind of concise sort of viewpoint and kind of spotlight of where Resident Evil was at the time. I think that's why it gets reviewed as such. I mean, I've played it a bit; it was fine. It was, you know, as a game, it was okay. It wasn't very remarkable, but I think it's just emblematic of kind of where the series was at that point.
I mean, we got Meat Transformer, so you know, in my book, that it's not completely hilarious or it's not completely bad if it's got hilarious shit like that. And yeah, I'm always gonna call Simmons the fucking Meat Transformer because he just transforms into like a T-Rex and then just goes about his business back into a people, and I'm like, what am I even watching? Like, I know Resident Evil has some body horror stuff, but like, come on. When did we go from being scared out of our minds to having a Meat Transformer?
That name. Oh my god.
Oh shit! That's probably the funniest thing I've ever heard in these discussions.
I mean, literally, he's not wrong. That's what he is. He's a meat transformer.
I was playing that with my buddy for the first time. I was just like, what am I even looking at?
Yeah, when it jumps to shark, I just don't know what to say. Like, at least I will give them credit when they started with RE2 Remake. At least they tried to reel it back in a sense, and you know, you could even say that earlier with like well, I don't know if you could say that earlier with 7, because 7 had ridiculous moments, but it had a sense of going back to what made Resident Evil, as opposed to saying, hey, we have Meat Transformer, we have sloppy seconds with Carla when she transformed. Just a bunch of crazy nonsense. Like, I don't think I've ever played a game as wacky as RE6 up until that point. Like, I thought 5 was pushing it with the boulder punching, but it went to a whole nother level, and I'm just like, what is going on? So I think when I start questioning those values, that's when it's like, yeah, you could take a break. You can put a kibosh on this for the time being.
So we'll agree that RE9, last game of the series, it's all done, dusted. Very good.
Yeah, probably. I would assume it would be.
Like, I think they are gonna do the anthology isolation thing afterwards, but in terms of like main protagonists, villains, or whatnot, I think that's gonna be it.
And I don't think that's a bad thing either. Like, I think, like,
I mean,
it doesn't feel like
franchises should be allowed to end at some point, because there's just not going to be anything new you're going to be able to tell after a while. You're just going to be regurgitating the same shit.
Well, actually, no. You know what? You know what they're gonna do? I would say in 10 years, we're gonna have Resident Evil 2 remake.
As
You know,
that could be possible. The remake.
yeah, like, you know,
yeah, is he on the
Remake.
metaverse? Yo, please, Leon Kennedy. I'm like, great.
Oh man.
No, I want to see more side stories, because in the old PS2 days, we had so many fucking side stories with Dead Aim, with Outbreak Files. Like, some of those were hit and misses, but they still had something to offer. Like, they also had their memes to go along with them. Like, I want more games like that after 9, if it's going to be the last one. I want more of that shit.
Someone on Twitter called me crazy for saying this, but I think it's a completely valid thing, and I think we'll have this talk before we sign off. But I was like, why not remake the really bad games like Survivor or the side stories that you mentioned that a lot of people might not know of, like Dead Aim or stuff like that. Like, you could go into the vault and make RE7 style Survivor, and if you make it good, I'm sure people would say, hey, that's kind of cool, I'll play that. So I don't see why not.
Dead Aim is just the guidance we do not. It is the guidance that we deserve.
If you're gonna do that, you might as well just like start afresh, really. You know, because then again, it's like if you're gonna start doing these old ones, it would get into this whole point again of where you're kind of like constricting yourself in the freedom you're allowing yourself creatively. So if you're going to do that, you might as well just do just something fresh, someone new, and then you've got full freedom of what you can do with the story, rather than like artificially constraining yourself. It seems kind of unnecessary.
I get that, but at the same time, we already know the path Capcom is going down on with all these remakes. There's definitely going to be more of them, but I do think they should be spread out as to not just RE. It'd be cool if they made other kick-ass reimagined games, like DMC1 or friggin'
yes.
Dino Crisis. I would take that day one. It would be nice, and if they put in the classic, like, because DMC1's kind of like a hack and slash, but it's also the most horror aesthetic that it was, considering it was supposed to be RE4. So they could do that and it could pay off. We have this cool action horror game, let's try that, and that'd be nice.
Honestly, yeah, because I mean, going through DMC2 is one of those things that, like, I wanted to like it,
Pain.
but I was just so bored playing it. But like, you could remake it and actually make it good. Like a lot of people's headcanon is that the reason that Dante is the way that he is because he's fucking depressed because he had to kill his brother again. And like, they could lean into that, and you know, he had his little bit of hope at the end, which led into DMC4. But like, you could remake 3 is kind of iffy because 3 is good the way that it is, but it could always be updated. The the game systems could be updated to play more like 5, because honestly 5 is the best to play in my opinion, and I'm sure most people would agree with that.
Yes.
But
Yes.
just at 4 can stay as it is. 4 is recent enough that I don't think it really needs that much work. But 1 to 3, especially if you haven't been playing them for the last 20 years, like I just started playing them for I think the last couple of years, and they're harder to go through because they are PS2 titles and because they are the earliest known versions of the hack and slash character action games. They're old, so they don't play as cleanly as the new ones, and it would be nice to see them go back and do that. So back to I believe it was Ren's point of remake the bad games or the lesser known ones that are part of the canon, because I know everybody has been wanting a Code Veronica remake since before they started doing the 2 remake.
Oh man.
Stuff like that, just remake stuff that is lesser known so that it can be like, oh hey, I played this remake now, so now I'm kind of curious to see how the original was and kind of go back to it and give it some more light.
My little hot take is that I still think they're gonna pick 5 over Code Veronica, and it's gonna be a war. It's gonna be a war.
I have no faith they're going to do Code Veronica. It's the one that probably most could do from a game standpoint, but I have no confidence they're actually ever going to do it.
I doubt it.
They said maybe, but
They talked about it.
That's
If the opportunity presents itself, they will do it.
that's
But
PR talk. Also.
I don't understand why though. Like I don't understand why they don't though. I mean, to me, I liked Code Veronica. I don't understand like
Same here, man.
money scared.
It's money.
Well,
That's literally the only reason.
That's true.
The
It's
big
just-
brain play we're not seeing right now is Wesker is going to be the villain for 9, and Wesker's return in Code Veronica is so fucking hyped. They're going to drop the remake for Code Veronica to get everybody hyped for Wesker.
Oh, that's true.
That could be
make sense.
that could be a money
That'd be
move.
funny.
Also-
That'd
and
be
funny.
as shit.
That'd be funny as well.
Turns out that Steve is actually the main villain.
More people remember that
God,
he was in Resident Evil 5 than he was in Code Veronica.
I mean that's also true. Like I said, I just have this scumbag feeling that they're gonna be like, oh, here's RE5 and everyone's gonna be pissed. I don't know why. I just have this gut intuition. Remember this now on this podcast. If they pick RE5 first over Code Veronica, and if you're raging and stuff like that, I just say I kind of do ahead of time. I don't know.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Claire.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, and I'm okay with that. Like I'd love to see a remake for Code Veronica, but I just feel like we would have known about it by now. And
Steve needs his justice.
So we'll see. Maybe they decide to in the end, but I'd be stunned if it actually happened.
Same. I'd be shocked. I'd be for it. I'll play it, but I'd be literally shocked if they decide to do it, because it feels like one of those things that's been. I wonder if this is the right word. Well, you know what? I think it is neglected. In terms
Yeah.
of like, yeah, how they've been talking about it less, and it's been coming up less, and when people mention it, it just gets overlooked. So, it is one of those things where like if they do it, I'd be surprised because it seems like that's the redheaded stepchild that they put in the attic forever. But I think that about ends this cool conversation. Great discussion all around from the panel. Good stuff.
Yeah, this was a fun one. This was a fun one.
So we will do the outros here. I'm gonna start with myself. So you can find me on Twitter at RentOperative_. You can find me on YouTube, Renegade Operative. We recently uploaded a Sonic podcast as well. So if you want double the trouble, then you can watch this and then watch that, and then all great discussions all around. And that's gonna be it for me in terms of working on content. I might just live stream for a while until the next podcast, and that's it for me. Shadow, where can we find you on social media?
Yep. I'm around on YouTube, Black Shadow 993. Also on Twitch, Black_Shadow_993, where I'm doing things. Things are occurring at the moment. There's a lot happening in my life. So it's all a bit all over the place, but there are things happening. It largely has a horror theme. So yay.
Next up is Deva.
All right. Well, you guys can primarily find me on YouTube. That's where I'm most, well known for. So just Hey Deva, HEY space DEVUH, and yeah, you guys can catch me there.
Next up is Deadman.
You can find me on YouTube mostly at Deadman Gaming, where I like to be the overly positive fanboy and just win things because I like them. And I'm also over on Twitter at DeadmanGaming13, and I also recently made a Tumblr since everybody's migrating off of Twitter, I guess. So that's also DeadmanGaming13, and I mostly just post any kind of artwork that I do on my side. And that's it for me.
Austin.
I am AK Austin. You can find me at YouTube under the same name as AK Austin. You can find me over at Twitch at AK Austin TTV, and it is the same handle on Twitter. And I would like to say, as the merchant here, this has been the Infinite Ammo Syndicate podcast. I'll buy it at a high price if I could, but it's a nice one to take care of. Bye-bye, all.
I knew that was coming. All right, and Zamzara, where can we find you, buddy?
Yeah, you could find me on Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, all that at Zamzara. You can find me on Hive as well. Any social media, you can find me there. I got some new computer parts coming in, so I got a new build for the stream coming up. So you'll see me on there doing horror games. I got a playthrough of Elden Ring coming up at the time of this recording, and I'm probably going to play through some Resident Evil games coming up here soon with the new build. So super excited for that. So thanks for having me.
All right, and once again, we are the Infinite Ammo Syndicate. We are signing out. Good discussion. We will see you guys next time until we do like Callisto Protocol, then Dead Space. Then next year is crazy for horror. I'm just letting people know, like right now, that's going to be insane. Definitely the beginning of the year is just going to be cycled with horror stuff. So for Resident Evil, we'll be back when we do RE4 Remake and just play the hell out of that game because that's what I plan to do day one. Until then, we will see you guys next time. Later.
I don't have enough cash for these games, stranger. Then buy me out.